Picture a cave in southern Poland. Limestone walls slick with moisture, firelight flickering against stone that's witnessed 100,000 winters, and somewhere, in the darkness, a family. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, an actual family. Parents and children, aunts and cousins, whose genetic fingerprints have survived for 100 millennia in the enamel of their teeth. I'm going to tell you about the oldest Neanderthal community ever reconstructed through DNA, and why what we found there should make us rethink everything we assumed about our closest relatives. For decades, Neanderthals were the punchline of human evolution, brutish, dim-witted, the failed experiment that died out while we thrived. That story was wrong. We now know they made art, buried their dead with ritual care, tended to the sick and injured, but their social lives, that remained a mystery, until a cave in Poland changed everything. In April 2026, researchers announced something unprecedented. They'd extracted DNA from 8 ancient teeth and discovered they weren't looking at strangers. They were looking at a community. At least 7 individuals, same population, same time period, 3 of them sharing identical maternal DNA. This wasn't scattered bones from different eras. This was a family portrait, frozen in time. Stajnia Cave sits in the Kraków-Częstochowa Upland of southern Poland, elevation 359 meters. The entrance opens into limestone cliffs that have sheltered humans and their relatives for hundreds of thousands of years. Between 2007 and 2010, archaeologists excavated the site methodically. Layer by layer, they uncovered stone tools, animal bones, evidence of fire use, and 9 human teeth. Now, finding ancient teeth isn't rare. Enamel survives when everything else decays. But what made Stajnia extraordinary wasn't the discovery. It was what those teeth still held inside them. DNA, preserved for 100,000 years in the microscopic structure of tooth enamel. And not just fragments, enough genetic material to reconstruct nearly complete profiles. The researchers extracted between 8 and 30 milligrams of powder from each tooth. That's less than a grain of rice. Then they treated it chemically to strip away modern contamination. Every skin cell, every breath, every accidental touch from the past century. What remained was ancient, pure. And when they sequenced it, the results stunned them. 8 teeth, at least 7 individuals belonging to the same population. People who likely lived during the same period, around 100,000 years ago, not scattered across millennia, together. And here's where it gets remarkable. 3 of those teeth, 2 from juveniles, 1 from an adult, carried identical mitochondrial DNA, same maternal bloodline, same family. Think about what that means. These weren't just members of the same species. They were family, children and a parent, or perhaps siblings, or cousins from a single maternal line. This makes them the oldest Neanderthal group ever genetically reconstructed in Central Eastern Europe. Not the oldest bones, the oldest community we can actually prove lived together. Now, why does maternal DNA matter specifically? Here's the thing. Mitochondrial DNA passes only from mother to child. It's unchanged across generations unless a random mutation occurs. So when 3 individuals share identical mitochondrial DNA, it means one of 2 things. Either they're siblings from the same mother, or they're mother and children, direct maternal line. And that's not all. The genetic profiles revealed something even broader, a population signature shared across the group. These 7 weren't random individuals. They belonged to the same community. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The mitochondrial DNA from Stajnia matches samples found hundreds of miles away in the Iberian Peninsula, southeastern France, and the northern Caucasus. This genetic lineage was once widespread across Europe, the same maternal line stretching from the Atlantic to the edges of Asia, a continent-spanning population that's now completely gone. So what happened to them? The researchers note something troubling. This ancient lineage was eventually replaced, overwritten by mitochondrial signatures from more recent Neanderthals. We don't know how. Was it gradual absorption? Climate-driven migration? Something more violent? The genes tell us they vanished. They don't tell us why. And then there's the bigger picture. Around 50,500 years ago, 40,000 years after this family lived in Stajnia Cave, modern humans arrived in Europe, and the 2 species began to interbreed. Recent research pins this interbreeding to a roughly 7,000-year window. That's not one encounter. That's generations of contact, long enough for our species' stories to become permanently entangled. The result? All modern humans outside Africa carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. You, me, everyone you know whose ancestry traces outside the African continent. That family in Stajnia Cave? Their descendants are literally walking around today. Not directly, that particular lineage disappeared, but their cousins' genes survive in nearly every human population on Earth. For decades, we thought of Neanderthals as a dead end, a species that failed where we succeeded. But the Stajnia discovery tells a different story, one of family, of community, of relatives we never knew we had. The study was published in Current Biology. The research team spent years developing techniques to extract usable DNA from samples this old, and even older samples may now be within reach. This isn't just about Neanderthals, it's about what's possible now. Ancient DNA techniques have advanced so dramatically that we can reconstruct not just individuals, but their relationships, their communities, their families. 100,000 years, that's how long those teeth preserved their secrets. The cave sealed them away, cold, dark, stable, until we developed the technology to read what they'd been holding. The juveniles in the group? We don't know how old they were when they died. We don't know the circumstances. But their presence tells us something profound about Neanderthal life. Children mean care. They mean protection. They mean a social structure organized around keeping the vulnerable alive long enough to grow up. You don't find juveniles in the fossil record unless adults were taking care of them. We've found Neanderthal skeletons with healed injuries so severe the individual couldn't have survived without help. Broken bones mended. Infections overcome. Someone cared for them. And now Stajnia gives us something more. Not just evidence of care, but evidence of family, of maternal lines, of children who stayed with their kin. The cave itself shows signs of repeated occupation. Fire hearts, stone tool debris. These weren't transient visitors. This was home, at least for part of each year. 100,000 years ago, this cave sat in a different world. Ice sheets pushed further south. The landscape was tundra and steppe. Woolly mammoths grazed on the plains below. And somewhere in that world, a group of 7 or more related Neanderthals lived their lives, hunted, gathered, raised their children, and left behind nothing but their teeth. Those teeth, 8 small pieces of mineralized tissue, held the key to everything. The proteins, the DNA, the story of a family that vanished 60,000 years before the first human cities rose. Here's something you might not realize. You can actually see your own Neanderthal heritage. Consumer DNA tests from companies like 23andMe and Ancestry now include Neanderthal ancestry percentages. If your ancestry traces outside Africa, you'll likely find 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in your results. Some people have more, some less. But almost everyone has some. And if you're curious to explore further, the Smithsonian's Human Origins website offers interactive tools that map Neanderthal human connections. It's free, it's fascinating, and it'll change how you think about your own family tree. For the primary research, the study was published in Current Biology, full access for anyone who wants to dig into the methodology. And if this kind of thing interests you, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. Now, let's step back for a moment. Why does this matter? Why should we care about a family that lived and died before our species even existed in its current form? Because for too long, we told ourselves a story about human exceptionalism, that we were the chosen ones, the successful ones, the only ones smart enough to survive. The Stajnia discovery demolishes that narrative. It shows us people, not specimens, people who loved their children, cared for their relatives, and built communities that lasted generations. They weren't our inferiors, they were our cousins. And when our ancestors finally met them, they didn't just compete. They merged. They had children together. Those children became our ancestors. The Neanderthal genetic legacy lives on in immune responses, in skin pigmentation, in countless traits we carry without knowing their origin. Stajnia Cave preserves something precious, not just bones or stones, but evidence of connection. A family bond strong enough to leave traces 100,000 years later. The researchers are careful to note that this is likely just the beginning. Other caves, other sites, may hold similar treasures, communities waiting to be rediscovered through the DNA locked in their teeth. The techniques developed for Stajnia could unlock family structures from sites across Europe and beyond. We might soon know not just who lived where, but who they lived with. Imagine reconstructing not just individual Neanderthals, but entire communities, understanding their migration patterns through maternal lines, tracing family structures across thousands of miles. That's the promise of ancient DNA research. It turns scattered bones into stories. It transforms specimens into people. It gives us back the humanity we'd forgotten was there. The Stajnia family, mother and children, or perhaps aunts and nibblings, or cousins from a common grandmother. They didn't know they were being preserved. They didn't know they'd become our teachers. But here they are, 100,000 years later, teaching us that family, community, care for one another, these aren't uniquely human inventions. They're older than our species itself. The next time someone uses Neanderthal as an insult, meaning brutish, stupid, primitive, remember Stajnia. Remember the mother and her children. Remember the family that cared for each other in a Polish cave. They weren't failures. They were family. And in a very real sense, they're our family too. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep asking questions about the people who came before us. Because their story isn't over. It's written in our DNA.